Hi, my name is Jonas. A few months ago I made a video called Famous Synth Sounds of the 80s and 90s. In this video I show some of the most recognizable synth patches and where they have been used. As there is a lot more to say about this subject, it's time for part 2. Before we start, a few things. First, I want to correct a mistake from part 1 where I claimed that the intro sound for Michael Jackson's Beat It was made on a Fairlight CMI. As lots of you have mentioned, this was actually a synclavier. Although I don't think the last has been said about this yet. There's still some discussion going on to know if they actually use a synclavier or a sample of a synclavier. Second, I want to say that everything I claim in this video is based on reading interviews or articles where they clearly mention the synthesizers being used, or using my ears and comparing the original tracks to the synthesizer patches to listen how closely they match. Still, like any other history research, this is never 100% sure. So if you spot a mistake and you have a good source to back it up, please let me know in the comment section. That being said, let's get started. The Yamaha CS-80, released on the market in 1977, is the ultimate analog polysynth. It has a lot of things going for it, but one of the major selling points was the amazing expressiveness by making great use of polyphonic aftertouch. The most famous CS-80 user is Vangelis. He started using it from day one and already featured it heavily on his late 70s albums Spiral, China and Boburg. This synth is very rare and expensive, so for this video I used the Arturia emulation. We'll be focusing on what's probably the most well-known use of the CS-80 in the 80s, the opening notes of the Blade Runner soundtrack. Now let's return to the Fairlight CMI. Released in the early 80s, it was one of the first commercially available sampler workstations and was extremely expensive. Corrected for inflation, today it would cost close to €70,000 or $80,000. Art of Noise used the CMI sample named ARR1 in their track Moments in Love. The CMI is also the source of a couple of very well-known orchestral 2D steps. These sounds have been sampled and resampled and been spread all around the music scene. A good example can be heard in Afrika Bambaata and Soulsonic Force's classic electro track Planet Rock. In part 1 of this series, I already showed quite a few of the Yamaha DX7 presets. This is Yamaha's very well-known FM synthesizer released on the market in 1983. The one sound I didn't mention in part 1 is the electric piano. This has been used in hundreds of tracks. I'm going to show one of its, according to me, most beautiful uses, the Twin Peaks theme. It was created using a combination of a TX7 for the more bell-like bass notes and a DX7 E-piano for the soft chords. The D50 was Roland's late 80s answer to the DX7. I already showed it in part 1, but still wanted to bring it back to show yet another very famous patch, Digital Native Dance. A slightly edited version of this is clearly audible in the opening of Michael Jackson's track Dirty Diana. It seems that in the late 80s, lots of answers had to be given in the synth world. As the Roland D50 was the answer to the DX7, the Korg M1 was the answer to the D50. And it even had more impact. The M1 is the source for many late 80s and loads of 90s sounds. I already featured the famous organ patch in part 1. Let's show a few more of its famous patches. Sounds that are still being used today. Especially the piano is still a standard in house music. Now let's talk about the two synths that beat every other synth on this list in the amount of tracks they are featured in. The two famous Roland TR drum computers. The TR-808 was released in 1980, and although it was being used on some tracks, it wasn't very popular as it didn't sound anything like real drums. After producing about 12,000 units, Roland ceased production. Of course, the rest is history. Hip-hop and electro producers, followed a bit later by techno and house producers, started using this machine and made the 808 the most popular drum machine of all times. The TR-909 was the follow-up of the 808 and was the first drum machine to use samples for some of its sounds. The crash, ride and hi-hats are samples, while the rest of the sounds are analog just like on the 808. The 909 has a more aggressive character and its sounds are instantly recognizable. It was a commercial flop as well, but when the early house and techno producers started using it, it really defined the sound of the genre and it never stopped being used. Nowadays, it's still heard everywhere. There are loads of emulations and samples. Roland themselves bundled the sounds of the 808 and 909 in several of their products. The most recent one is the TR-8S. The original units, once unwanted, are now worth thousands of euros. This small and unassuming rack FM tone generator, released by Yamaha in 1987, is responsible for the bass in uncountable dance tracks. The TX81Z is the source of the most famous bass preset of all times, Lately Bass. After some research, it seems that the TX81Z is also responsible for the organ sound in the famous early 90s dance classic Plastic Dreams. I already talked about the famous Roland TR drum computers. They have a very famous bass synth cousin as well. It was released in 1981 to be used as a programmable bassline guitar simulator, and, just like the TR drum computers, it was a commercial failure as it didn't sound like a bass guitar at all, and it was quite difficult to program. In the late 80s, cheap second-hand units started to get used by the early techno and house producers, and as the story goes, it were the Chicago house producers of Future who first used the TB-303 in the acid style, programming a random pattern and manipulating the knobs on extreme settings, making the unit produce the now famous sounds. And once again, the rest is history. Acid was born, and it never died. And with that last example being the TB-303 bassline out of the Daft Punk track Da Funk, let's mention the other famous synth in this track, the Korg MS-20. This semi-modular monophonic analog synth was first released in 1978 and has a very unique sound thanks to its dual filter setup. It has been used by many people during the years, but it started to become popular again in the late 90s when interest in analog synthesizers was being renewed again. Some famous examples are of course Da Funk and Monsieur Oizo's Flat Beat. Da Funk is a very nice example of several of the famous synths mentioned in this video coming together, as it also uses a TR-909 and a TB-303. And that's it again for today. Now before you hit the comment section mentioning synths that I forgot here, please first check out part 1 of this series, cause maybe I already featured it. If you have ideas for part 3, or spotted a mistake and can back it up with a good source, please let me know in the comment section below. And as usual, if you want more like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to be notified as soon as a new video goes online, click the bell button. Bye bye.